Let's everybody stand up real quick. Oh, I need to be mic'd. Can we do that real quick? Let's everybody soften the feet, soften the hips, stay in a monkey position or just sit down. Again. When you inhale, you're going to curve the spine. And then exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. One more time. Inhale. Exhale. Okay, now with your face, start to make break the pattern in your head, really just screw it all up. Come on, really feel that, open up that pattern. Let it escape. Let that person that's been shelled in your body just get out of here. That's it. Okay, don't be looking at, well, I'm sorry, the whole wide world is looking at you right now. That's it. Feel good? Very good. Very good. Let's do one last thing. Hold your tummy and start laughing. All right, good. Sit down. That was the best joke I ever told. Sit down. All right. Those practices were all Taoist practices handed down to me from Master Mantak Chia, who I'm certified as an instructor with. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Am I okay? Thank you. So I know of no better way to share my information or whatever I know other than kind of sharing my story. Because we all have our own story, and from our story we accumulate our experiences, and then we come into light with the brilliant piece of gold that we have to offer the world. And we, all of us here, have brilliant pieces of gold to offer the world. I just happen to be here able to share mine with you. So, I think I was 4 years old at the time, and my babysitter must have been about 14 years old. She must have been a teenager. She was our downstairs neighbor. And I'll never forget lying down in bed and her lowering her body, her genitals, right on my face, very slowly. I'll never forget the look as a child, the smells, the sensations. I think she may have been playing with me, I'm not sure. But to this day, they remain the most strongest impression that I had in my life. Never once did my babysitter say, "Don't tell anybody." Never once was I ever communicated that what was happening was anything different than playing in a backyard, looking at a television movie. It was a wonderful time to experience my first sexuality with no shame. And today it remains, for me, I think, the most healthiest aspect of how I view sexuality. Now, I had no idea that having such close contact with genitals was a no-no. So with my sister, I started playing doctor and If you've ever had brothers and sisters as a child, you start playing doctor with each other and taking temperatures here and there. We had thermometers back then, you know. And I remember my little sister at some point went up to my mom, I think we were 7 or 8, and she told my mother, and my mom came up to me and she said, "Did you touch your sister there?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, the good Catholic woman that she is, we don't do that. And I said, "Oh, okay." So I figured something was not allowed, but I didn't quite get it yet. I started really enjoying pleasuring myself at a young age. Maybe my babysitter just woke me up in that area. And I remember that I just had the greatest time masturbating all the time as a little child. And I did this, I think it felt like 24 hours a day. That's all I thought. And I had, again, no idea that anything was crossing boundaries for people until I was in elementary school. I think I was in about 4th or 5th grade. And it was a Catholic school, because my mother was a Catholic religious person. And I remember I'd be in class and I'd always be touching myself. So good. And I remember Sister Leonto, that was her name. And she had one of those hoods, you know, the black Darth Vader. She came up to the desk and I looked at her and she said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "We don't do that here in class." I said, "Okay." And that was the first time that I recognized that something that I enjoyed doing that felt so good in life that nobody had ever told me about was somehow not permissible for other people to be present for. But I did it in private. And I think I went on like that for, 4 or 5 years until I had this one terrifying event. Now, I was still in Catholic school at the time because my mother wanted to be a good Catholic boy. I think I was even an altar boy for some period. But I was having a jolly great time masturbating, and all of a sudden, this white stuff came out. And I said, "Oh my God, this must be why they told me not to do this." I broke it. Being the good Catholic boy, I said, "Okay, all right, I got it, God. I got it. Fix it, and I'll never touch myself again. Just make sure. I got it." I was a terrified little boy. Well, God answered my prayers in about 25 minutes because I began touching myself, and it felt good, and I said, "Oh, that was quick." But I began to suspect that maybe God had nothing to do with it. But that experience was a very powerful experience because it made me realize that all the orgasms I had had from the age of 4 till about 11 were very different from all the orgasms I began to have after that when I would ejaculate. So it became very clear to me the difference between orgasm and orgasm with ejaculation. And I never forgot that. Well, I did forget it for the next 25, 30 years. Because when we put those two together, I think what nature does, it makes us fuse those two responses in our body so that we will have babies. Nature knows what they're doing. And that little piece of experience would not come back to me until I started studying, maybe 40 years later, what I was to learn with Master Mantak Chia. That's kind of the beginning of a little boy growing up, which is probably not so different from other little boys. And I remember when I got to that age in my neighborhood when we'd have, make-out times. Do you all remember that when you were little kids and you'd find either a cousin or a neighbor and you'd go somewhere and make out, right? I had a wild little cousin who used to drive us crazy. She used to get all of us cousins together, bring us to the closet, and make out with us. And then we go back and she said, no, she said I was the best one. And I'll never forget that the making out, I'll never forget when I first got the making out and touching the breasts, and then I touched a wet pussy for the first time. Oh my God, this is amazing. My head is exploding. If you really think about it, our very first contact with another being sexually after we've touched ourselves is usually a touch. Do you ever think about that? I would say 99% of you, your first contact with another human being was touching their genitals. It was not jumping into bed and saying, "Oh, right, we're going to go for it." It was a touch. Remember that touch? And that touch could have probably lasted, gosh, a good 5 or 10 years. Just think if we had a community knowing this, and I believe that I'm going to take a survey when I believe when we find this statistic to be true and establish the fact that our children, the first sexual contact that you make with another human being after having touch with yourself is touching another human being's genitals, that if we come to that realization that we as parents can cultivate that from the very beginning, because we know that that's going to happen. Wouldn't it be beautiful if we as parents could take our children and say, when you touch that, this is how you touch it. And this is how you're going to respond to it. You touch it with respect. You make sure your hands are clean. And you can make this a beautiful make-out art that you can do for as long as you like. I'm not so sure our children would be rushing to have intercourse.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right? I think we would get so embroiled with the pleasure that we get just out of touching. And the communication that would happen, can you imagine two little kids, okay, now it's your turn to touch me. Now it's my turn to touch you. Wow, that was a nice orgasm. Let's go out and play now. Wouldn't that be a beautiful world? You know, we have two great mysteries in life that I've been able to deduce. One is the mystery of birth. The fact that this sperm in this egg has this thing called DNA, which if you put that under a microscope is nothing but energy. It's nothing but atoms built of positive and negative electrons. And then from that we get this conception that then divides into 2 cells, into 4 cells. In other words, we see right before us this physical creation from a nothingness to an everythingness. That's an incredible mystery, don't you think? One of my students that I teach dancing to is she's a Columbia professor, one of the top. Her husband is considered 5 times, I think he just won the Nobel Peace Prize in biology. But to this day, they don't know what that mystery is all about. The greatest scientists in the world. They just know the phenomena with which it operates, and they're able to track some of the patterns. But how does it happen? Nobody knows. It's a beautiful mystery. There's our first entry into the sacredness when we talk about the physical world. I love Sherry because Sherry is all about how sexuality starts from recognizing how it relates to our reproductive system. It doesn't mean we're all going to have babies. It doesn't mean we're all heterosexual. But we cannot escape from the fact that we all came out of a woman. And we cannot escape from the fact that the sperm of a man and an egg of a woman were united. And we cannot escape the fact that our bodies will one day pass and leave somewhere else. Those are inescapable facts which we can actually rejoice in because we have some great stable datum to build some really intelligent thinking. We don't have to go so woo-woo, just look at the body. Another inescapable fact is that when we come into this world, we go through a slicer. We're either sliced into a man's body or we're sliced into a woman's body. can't escape that. Which means we have this wonderful dynamic that you have many things as a woman that I don't have that I want. And I have many things as a man that you don't have that you want. So now we need to create some games so that you can give me what I want and I can give you what you want. Isn't it fun? It's a foundation. I'll never forget the relationship of my body to my consciousness, because that's the other mystery. The fact that we are one of the few living, animated beings on this planet that can say, I am. I'm aware. I'm here. I'm communicating. There's no other species doing that we know of. Maybe they speculated dolphins and whales communicate, but not like we do. So we have this aspect of ourselves that as a little child and as an old person about to pass, we're the same exact person. There's something about us that has never aged. The person that you're listening to me right now as we speak is the same person that was looking into the backyard of your home or out of your window saying, that's interesting. That consciousness has not changed, right? You've always been here. You always will be here. You have the same mind. You might look in the body in the mirror and say, oh my God, I'm changing. But the person who's seeing that is never changing. So we have another great mystery. The mystery of consciousness, of our awareness. I'll tell you a nice story about how consciousness and awareness work for me on some level. I was teaching dancing at the time, and I taught it for 25 years, and I had this really hot student who kept propositioning me. And naturally, in my field of business, it's so easy, because when I got into ballroom dancing, it's not like it was today, like Dancing with the Stars. When I got into ballroom dancing, and I'm not going to tell you how long back it was, but it was right after college, and I did it as a fluke. And when I came into ballroom dancing, all the men were gay. And when I saw that, I said, Eureka! There's not too many straight men here, and there's all these beautiful women here. So I actually got into ballroom dancing because I just loved women. And I saw that the demand and supply factor at the time put me in a really good position to have many hot dates, which it did. And I remember this one student who always propositioned me, and she was getting to me. She was jeopardizing my job, because if I ever got found out, I don't think they'd fire me because they needed me. And we went on our first dinner date, and I was ready to go with this one. She had really built me up. And we sat down, served some appetizers, had a little wine, and she looked at me very clearly, very quietly, and said, I hope you don't think that you and I are going to have sex at all. I think I was holding my drink at the time, and I said, could you excuse me a second? And I put my glass down. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom, and I masturbated. And I came back and said, I'm sorry, what did you say? She said, oh, I just want you to know that I want you to know that I don't want you to think that we're ever going to have sex. I said, oh, that's no problem. I remember that experience because it made me realize that my consciousness always changed when I ejaculated. That the way I thought before, I had built up sperm, if you will, and the way I thought afterwards when it was gone, I was looking at the world normal again. And I began to find that very interesting. Why does my mind think different when I'm released and when I'm not? What's happening with the mind? As I said, I had a great career ballroom dancing, but I did get serious, and I did get married to my dance partner so that we could solidify our relationship and focus on our career. We twice represented the United States twice, won a world championship. I had to stay married. I had to stay mostly monogamous. That was the sacrifice to get successful in my career. We used to have sex every day for 12 years. Unprotected. Maybe one of us weren't fully happening. We don't know, but it just, we never worried about it. And I remember one time, and at the time we were during sex, drug, and rock and roll era, our little vice was pot. You know, we'd smoke a little pot, and then we'd have our sex. And I remember this one time, she tapped me on the shoulder while we were making mad love. We'd had our little pot, and she said, "You're not hard." And I said, "Huh?" And she says, we're fucking, but you're not hard." I said, "Oh, that's strange." And we were kind of tired from the pot, so I figured, okay, let's go to bed. Never happened before. Next morning, I woke up with the most terrifying feeling in my whole body. I think I woke up shaking, nervous. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why I was waking up terrified. And I started to take inventory. What's going on? And for the first time in my life, and I hadn't known that this was a fact until that morning, but for the first time in my life, I woke up without an erection. Now, I never thought that I always did wake up with an erection. But when I woke up without an erection, my body did not feel the same. And I became terrified. Something was wrong. Now, at the time, thank God, there was no such thing as Viagra. There was none of these internet networking that we have that gives us information. I was alone and terrified. I looked up the yellow pages. Remember the yellow pages? How many remember yellow pages? And I said, okay, sexual reproduction, what's going on? At the time we went to urologists, and the urologists that I went to gave me the same diagnosis. They said, nothing's wrong with you. You're hitting 40s. This happens once in a while. And I said, you got to be kidding. This is not what I bargained for in life. And I went to 2 different urologists because I was obviously talking to a guy who had done the same thing and gone through the same life that he had gone through. So I didn't believe him because I thought, well, that was his story. I needed to go another one and hear the same story. And I heard the same story. When I was at the end of my rope, I hadn't gone to the pawn shop yet and get a gun, because if I was in any way what I thought I was, not able to make love in my life after the illustrious life I had had already, to me there was nothing worth living for. I was ready to shoot myself. But I went to the East West bookstore over on 13th Street. Remember that one? Is it still there?
Just closed.
Oh, it just closed. And I looked, because I didn't believe any more in the medical profession. They were giving me the same story. And I found this one book that said The Tao of Health, Sex, and Longevity. I said, the Tao? I mean, I studied Tai Chi, but what does it have to do with sex? And health? Sex, health, and longevity? What do those 3 words have to do? But maybe they have an answer. I got the book, and I looked at the index right away, because I went straight for the index. What's the word you think I looked for? Impotence. No, erectile dysfunction was not even a word then. It was either impotent or that was it. So I said, okay, because I believed I was impotent. I looked up impotency and I said, okay, page whatever. Impotency, the Taoists believe, is caused by excessive sex. And I said, oh, shit. You have to be kidding me. But I read on. The cure for impotency, according to the Taoists, is more sex. I said, wow, cool. What the hell are they talking about? But I could go with what's going on here. And it was my first awareness that there was this work out there that we deplete ourselves sexually when we overburden the body, but the way to get the body back is to actually sexualize the body but not deplete it. And I read down, it looked for this person, Master Montauk Chia. East West did not have any books, so I ran down to Chinatown and I started walking the streets looking for a book that I could find. And sure enough, on Mott Street, there was Cultivating Male Sexual Energy by Master Montauk Chia. Took the book, read it from cover to cover, right on the street. And at the end of the book was Master Montauk Chia's number, and I called him and I said, I want to learn how to master my sex, just like this book says. And of course he giggled at me. He says, well, I'm moving to Thailand next week, but my teachers you can go and study with in New York. And I started to study 6 Healing Sounds, Microcosmic Orbit. Nothing about sex. And I started to get really pissed after 6 months. Finally, my teacher, who was Japanese at the time, and I thought he was just being uptight, said, okay, for Anton, we're going to study these practices so he can see how it all makes sense. And it was the most amazing education that I had. Luckily, I was still married at the time, so my wife and I went back to sexing every day as we did, but we learned how to really build up our sex, build up our sexual energy. We learned how to, with the microcosmic orbit, how to not keep the energy congested in the genitals and spread it out throughout the body, so that there was not this need to release the energy. Because if you have a small area where you're building up energy, you can't hold it that long. But if you've got a whole body where you're holding energy, you could pack a lot in. Make sense? So what I learned from these practices led me to create Sexy Spirits, because I thought every man has to know this. And I remember putting up advertisements, and I'm going to teach men how to have these fabulous orgasms and great sex with their women or men or with themselves, and how to have it forever, and how to change how they feel emotionally and how they think spiritually, because this is what happened to me. And I had 3 or 4 men come into the class. Wasn't very interesting for people. And I think Viagra was starting to take over now, because this was now close to 5 or 6 years later. Let me also just say that in that book, The Tao of Health, Sex, and Longevity, I learned for the first time fasting and cleansing. And Kevin Schuchter, who's shooting this, does a beautiful, fabulous 5-day fast, which was the protocol that I used for a good 5 years, where I brought my body back into a rejuvenated, regenerative self. Sexy Spirits was not enough to entice men to learn how to control their sexual energy. Especially today, we have a magic blue pill that takes the ticket away. I can only thank my stars that that blue pill was not around at the time, because knowing myself, I probably would have taken the shortcut. But because it wasn't there, I changed my life. I changed the way I view the world, my sexuality. And Sexy Spirits needed to have the juice. It needed to have life. And that's when I realized that women are life. The women are life because they bring life into the world. I realized that the women, their bodies are different from our bodies, but they have the whole template of life. We don't, as men. Doesn't mean we're inferior. It just means they have what we don't have, and we have what they don't have. And once I began to plug into that and invite as many women speakers and teachers and have women come out with their truth and create a safe space where women could share their knowledge and truth, I began to learn a lot more. As much as I know, a woman will always have to keep reminding me. Women, if there's a burden that you want to call a burden, don't be afraid to know that you will always have to train and educate your men if you want them to enjoy life, because you are the holder of that. And you can do it in such a way that it's real juicy for them. Right, Deborah?
Yeah.
Deborah knows great ways to do that, as many of the people here. So when we talk about sacred sex, we try to bring it to the body, because the body is where all the truth is. It's very interesting that a woman, when she's born, is born with approximately 500,000 eggs in her ovaries. Isn't that amazing? As we speak, each one of you men are creating 1,000 sperm per second as we speak. You have so much sexual energy. Do you think nature intended for you to have babies with all that energy? We'd be in trouble. Incidentally, nature did intend you to have sex and babies with all that energy. If nature had its way, it would run you to the bone as long as you kept having babies. And that's a good thing to know. It doesn't mean nature's our enemy. It means that nature has its own agenda that we need to flow in with. We need to understand nature so that we can kind of jump on the boat of the river that it's flowing and kind of keep the rudder in the direction that we would like to take it in. That's the Taoist way. The Taoist way is looking at how life flows and jumping into the way of life flows to where you want to go, because you'll get there a lot quicker, right? So hopefully my story has touched a little bit of your lives. I wish that we had the time for each one of you to come up, because I know, you having heard my story, that you're probably far more open to share yours. And it would be wonderful for me to listen to each one of yours, because I would get that much more piece of knowledge and information that would enhance my life. We're going to have a few little questions and answers, if that's okay. And if we have no questions and answers, that's fine. And that'll also give us a little break. So is there anybody that would like to ask some questions and answers? Yes. Could you give a... Thank you, Marie.
I have a very basic question, because I'm new to a lot of these concepts. I've heard them for a while. And that's back to sacred. I'm hearing sacred seems to precede pretty much everything that everybody's doing here, and I don't have a definition for myself of what sacred means.
Yes. Yes. When we talk about sacredness, when we talk about spirituality, we're really talking in abstract, pure abstract. You have your definition of spirituality and sacredness. We all have our definitions. I opened up the lecture with mysteries, the two mysteries for me. The mystery is how life is created. And I think we could add to that mystery how death occurs, where we go when we die. These are all great mysteries that we're only going to know when we go there. So the closest thing I could come to sacredness is a mystery. And it's being humble to that mystery, because we can't do anything about it. So when we're able to approach this beautiful miracle of birth with humility as a mystery and with wonder, it allows us to vibrate with a sense of interest and openness, because nobody will ever know how it happens. When we exit into this world, into leaving our body, into that world, if we can cultivate now how to look at death with pure humility, pure mystery, pure reverence, just think how beautiful death will be. One of the two greatest lacks of education we have in our culture is how to relate intimately with another human being and how to die. We don't have those two great mysteries. Just think if we could begin to be more aware of them and to look at it with awe fill ourselves with the unknown. That's the closest thing I can define as sacredness, as a mystery. How are we doing? One big breath. Everybody having a good time?
Yes.
Excellent. Good. Thank you really very much for all of you being here, all of you beautiful beings. Come to Sexy Spirits if you're in the New York area. Sign up. We got a lot of beautiful things that are just going to blow up New York. We really want to create a conscious community. And we really want to create it with a lot of articulation and clarity and sanity, so that the general public can come into this and not be so turned off, by the words we use. Sacredness and spirituality are words that scare people, believe it or not, just like sex and sexuality. So we as New Yorkers have to find a language that's normal, down to earth, right down to the body, right down to the reality. And I think New York is the hottest place for it to happen, really. And we don't have it yet. It's amazing, but we don't have it yet. And it's just beginning. So if you're all on board, we can really take this city to another place where we have community to feel safe and really expand in our sexuality and in our consciousness. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.